Well, here we are. Welcome back to Bookish, everybody. We're your virtual program on authors, thinkers, and the literary life, brought to you by the Southern California News Group and the Bay Area News Group. I'm Sam Dunn. I'm the senior editor of premium content here at the Southern California News Group. And I want to give a big, huge thank you, shout out, big kiss, whatever you want to call it, to our Reader Reward subscribers. You're the ones who support our programs. We really appreciate it. We couldn't do it without you. And if you are a Reader Rewards subscriber attending tonight, you're automatically entered to win a $50 gift certificate from Arvida Book Company in Tustin, one of those great local bookstores. So yay. Our winner last month was Phil Courtney. Phil, we hope you're enjoying those books. And speaking of subscribing, if you are not a subscriber yet, why not? In Southern California, go to scng.com/subscribe to find your local paper. And in the Bay Area, go to bayareanewsgroup.com/reader services to find your local paper. Please, folks, become a stakeholder in local journalism. It matters now, maybe more than ever. Also, if you've missed our past programs, go to scng.com/virtual programs and check those out. And oh, the screen's already up on checking things out. Our bookish swag for stylish book nerds is there. Please dress appropriately if you love our show. And hey, speaking of our show, we're thinking about changing the time up for the program. We've been doing this since the pandemic at 5 p.m. And we just would like to know your input on this. Take this little poll as I go through our usual reminders. If you have questions, please use the Q&A feature on your Zoom toolbar to ask questions. But if you just want to add a comment, use the chat feature found on your screen. And don't worry, you're not going to miss anything because a link to the program is going to be sent to you later. The show is also, as always, posted on scng.com/virtual events, and that's where, and you can also find us on YouTube. All right. So tonight, let's get to the show. Let's get to our guests of honor. We're talking about books tonight with women in big trouble. And our first guest is none other than Marcia Clark. Oh, Julie, you might want to take the poll off there. Thank you so much. Marcia Clark began her career in law as a criminal defense attorney and went on to become a prosecutor in the LA District Attorney's Office, where she famously was the lead prosecutor for the O.J. Simpson murder trial. Since then, Marcia has become, among many other things, a best-selling author who has penned 9 legal thrillers and one blockbuster memoir, Without a Doubt, which was about the Simpson trial, if you remember. Today, she joins us to talk about her newest release, her first true crime book, called Trial by Ambush: Murder, Injustice, and the Truth About the Case of Barbara Graham. Marcia, please join us. We're so happy to have you. There she is.
I am so happy to be here. Hi.
Yay!
Thank you for having me.
I have to tell you something. So a few years ago at the Festival of Books, I was in the green room with some of my other friends, and you walked by on your way to get some coffee, I think. And we all looked at each other and we said, "That's Marcia Clark. She's a hero. That's Marcia Clark."
Oh, thank you. That's so
good.
kind.
No, it's great to have you on the show. And I have to say, during the O.J. Simpson trial, they said that was the trial of the century. But then 70 years ago, there was another trial, the Barbara Graham trial, that was also considered at the time the trial of the century. I had never heard about this case, and I understand from the foreword of your book, neither had you. And you kind of stumbled on it. How did that happen? Can you tell us?
Total accident. I mean, really total accident. I hadn't heard of her either, and I was surprised that I hadn't. But I was looking at another case, completely different case, but it was involving a woman who had been on death row. And at the footnote at the bottom of the page, there was a mention of Barbara Graham. And the case I was looking at wasn't all that interesting to me because it didn't have any resonance. I was looking for a case that brought up principles and issues that would resonate today, that really mattered in terms of grander things than just the monster in the closet,
Yeah.
And the one I was looking at didn't. And then I looked into Barbara Graham, and it struck me, first of all, the way she looked. There was
Yeah.
nothing about, right? Then there was one picture in particular that got me, and it's the one that you see in the very beginning of the book where she's sitting in her prison dress at a table with her lawyer, and she's surrounded by this room full of male reporters. There's not another female around, and they're all like hovering over her. I mean, like almost vulture-like, and some are kneeling in front of her. And the intensity of the energy that they're pouring toward her is so, it's just riveting. And she looks over her shoulder and at them, and the look in her face and the feeling that you get from her is absolutely terrified.
Yeah.
This is supposedly the woman that they were standing up as the monster, the villain, the what few articles I was able to get and read. She painted her as, they called her Bloody Babs, and she was this villainous and this demonic force. And I'm like, what? You know, didn't fit.
Well, two things about that. One, if I may, you must have had an empathetic response to a woman being hounded by reporters like that. I'm sure you had a flashback to your O.J. Simpson trial days when you saw the depth of the reporters coming at her with that intensity. But also, let's talk about the murder itself that she was accused of and ultimately is convicted of. Um, she she was what do you call it? A decoy for uh, other murderers who kill a woman in her home, an old vaudeville performer. Talk a little bit about the murder itself.
No, it's a fascinating story because all the characters are so vivid. They jump off the page at you. You know, it's an amazing thing. So Mabel Monahan was the victim. She was in her 60s. She was a trippy lady, really cool. She had been a vaudeville trooper. She was a famous roller skater. She met her husband, who was a famous ice skater and roller skater. On the vaudeville circuit, they became a duo performing all over the country. And on
Great.
occasion, she would double as Madame Martinez, a palm reader. She was a trip. And then it got to a point where her skating days were over. She had a daughter who also wanted to be a performer. The daughter actually auditioned for a floor show at this wonderful restaurant called Ships in Venice Beach. It was docked off of the Santa Monica Pier here in Los Angeles. And she auditioned, and Tudor Scherer, the owner of this place, which was actually a speakeasy operating during Prohibition times to make a lot of money in illegal booze, hired her for the floor show. They fell in love, got married. Mabel got along with him so well. They got to be very, very tight. And even though the daughter had a very rough time with Tudor Scherer because he became a major league casino entrepreneur, he basically was operating out of Las Vegas because he couldn't operate his gambling operation in Los Angeles anymore because he was getting in the way of Mickey Cohen, the gangster, who
Yeah.
was not taking kindly to any kind of competition. But he did very, very well, became a very wealthy man. He was also a player. And the daughter didn't like that and eventually divorced him. He settled a lot of money on her and gave her this little house in Burbank, which is a quiet suburban neighborhood 2 miles from where I used to live during the
Isn't that
trial.
funny? Right. Yeah.
Such a
Such a coincidence.
coincidence.
Anyway, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so when she got divorced and he gave her the house, she didn't want the memories. I don't want the house. She gave it to her mother. Mabel was delighted. She'd never had a house before. She lived in hotels all over the country, never a house. But it also kind of frightened her because there's no security. You stay in a hotel, there's a man at the desk, there's all kinds of layers between you and the outside world. In a house, it was just her. So she was very security conscious and she kept the doors locked, the windows locked, everything locked up tight. And she was known to do that. Now, the bad guys living in Los Angeles, the gangsters, some of them who worked for Mickey Cohen, had started a rumor that Tudor Scherer, who was still very, very friendly with Mabel and would come to visit her often, was stashing money in the Burbank house. And
Yeah.
they rumored that there was this safe with hundreds of thousands of dollars, and all they had to do is get past her and they'd be rich. Whether
Isn't
this
that
was ever,
Yeah, just as a side note, it kind of reminded me of Truman Capote's In Cold Blood.
yeah.
It was the same idea of this rumor that had circulated among cons that there was a safe with a lot of money in it. And of course, that wasn't the truth. But anyway,
Yeah, you're so right about that. You know, it's funny. I went back to reread In Cold Blood just to get a sense of how he did it because I was, so interested in the stylistic flair that he had for it.
yeah.
But yes, you're right. I hadn't thought of that parallel. It struck me as bizarre. They had been casing the place for a couple of years by the time this actually happened. They couldn't figure out how to make it work. And then they realized, well, we've got Barbara. Barbara was very tight with one of the main bad guys, Emmett Perkins. She was his dice girl. Which is basically a shill. So she would
Yeah.
go to hotels, nice hotel bars, pick up men. They'd want to go someplace more private. She'd suggest on the way that they stop at the gambling house run by Emmett Perkins. And,
And the rest, yeah, is history.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
she'd persuade
Right.
them to drop a lot of money. So, and that's, by the way, how she met her final husband. She married quite a bit, but that's how she met the group that decided they were going to knock over Mabel Monahan's house. So the group then used her as the decoy.
Yeah.
She goes, knocks on the door. She was 5'2", 120 pounds, small, petite, beautiful, and she knew how to be smooth. And she did. She knocked on the door. My car broke down. Can you please let me use your phone? I just for a minute. I just don't know what else I'm going to do. And Mabel, who was so security conscious, thought this is no threat. And
Sure.
she was right about that, except the men walked in right behind Barbara. And
And
she was found the following day with the door ajar, which was very unlike her. Her body had been dragged into a hallway where she had been bludgeoned and strangled to death.
yes. And Barbara gets painted as the evil villainess. And it was so striking to me, the misogyny and the hatred toward her. There was no, they called her, as you mentioned early, Bloody Babs. And she was too beautiful to be innocent, and she was too compelling. It was like the witch trials of Salem almost, don't you think?
Yeah, I do. And the problem is, I think that it's simply she fell prey to two things. Number one thing was I think, the ego of the prosecution. It
Yeah.
was easy to convict those two thugs sitting next to her. They looked like exactly what they were. And they were a bore for that reason. I mean, they were so obvious. She was the jewel in the crown. Getting her was going to be the real crucible. If you could do that, you're one hell of a guy. And so they went after her like they were chasing the devil. And it was unseemly, as one federal judge later put it, how hard they ran after her, chasing her right into the gas chamber. So they pulled out all the stops to get her and knew that they could slide when it came to the two guys. But the papers did their job too, because the
Yeah.
press, this was the classic clickbait of its time. Back
Yeah.
then, there was no internet, right? There was just newspapers, and boy, were there a lot of them. And they were all in competition with one another. And the more sensational you could be, the more you're going to get readers. And so each one tried to top the next to get the readership. And they were coming out with like 3 times a day, morning, afternoon, news edition, evening news edition. And
Yeah.
each one was getting more and more sensational. And the truth got completely lost in the chaos of that. Because all they did then was chase after the one thing that didn't fit in this picture that was the most fascinating to the audience, and that was Barbara.
It's amazing. It seemed, so you worked on this book for 2 years, correct? And it seems to me the deeper you dug into the actual trial, the more outrage at the media, certainly, but at the prosecution,
Yeah.
fueled your writing. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because really, this book, for anyone who hasn't read it yet, this is a fascinating education in the law system and the legal system itself. The way you analyze the actual trial and the steps that the prosecution took and the steps that the defense couldn't take to protect her. Talk a little bit
Yeah.
about that. It's fascinating.
It was one of the weirdest things that I could have imagined happening in the course of investigating this case. So as soon as I started to dig in and read the newspaper accounts and find as much information as I could, I realized that the real answers could only lie in the trial, and I had to get those transcripts, and I was afraid I never would. That was its own crucible that I talk about at length in the foreword.
Do
It
the
was a
forward. It's
crazy,
fascinating.
oh, what a ride. I mean, I had my heart in my mouth. If I
Oh,
don't get those
listen,
transcripts,
what I loved, you didn't even know that because it was a death penalty case, they had to keep the records. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, no, it's great. I mean, that's a really great point. I knew they had to keep the records for 10 years because I handle appellate cases. That's what I do.
Right.
So for felonies, but I didn't know whether there was a point after which they let them go. As it turned out, as luck would have it, when it's a death penalty case, they keep the records forever.
Yeah.
So that was, lucky for me that they had them still. And I got to see, so when I'm telling you what happened in this trial, I'm telling you what really happened under oath in the courtroom. There's no, I'm not interpreting anything. I'm telling you word for
Yeah.
word how it went.
Yeah.
So it's reliable in its account in that way. I had expected to be wowed by the prosecution because the lead prosecutor was this icon in the DA's office. J. Miller Levy was someone that we all revered. Me too. I didn't know him. I joined the office after him, but he was somebody who had tried so many big cases. Carol Chessman, L. Ewing Scott, the first no-body homicide in California. He was the man. Whenever one of us lost a case, we'd all joke and say, well, J. Miller Levy could have won it. You know what I mean? That we literally. So
Yeah.
I was excited to see my hero in action. And he turned out to be really sleazy, very, very smart, but really underhanded and pushed the envelope. To be fair, a lot of the things he did that I didn't like were legal at that time. They were
Oh,
up to the
yeah.
line, but were legal and since have been deemed illegal. Completely illegal actually would get him maybe even state bar sanction and certainly a mistrial. But back then you could. But he went further than that. And they even hid evidence from the defense.
Yes.
It was key evidence and went to the credibility of their star witness and accomplice. It doesn't get much worse than that. So there were all kinds of things they did that were illegal even then. And I was so surprised, and I expected to see that the defense was going to be kind of lame because defense attorneys back then, when they were appointed to represent indigent defendants who couldn't afford to pay, they didn't
Right.
get paid a dime. The state didn't pay them, the county didn't pay them. They were really working pro bono. And in a case that goes as long as one like this, your whole
Yeah.
practice, right, goes down the drain for months.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm not recalling the defense attorney's name, but
Jack Hardy.
Jack Hardy, he was heroic essentially
Yeah.
in keeping his defense of her for so long.
He was so impressive. He was so impressive. He worked so hard. I mean, tireless. He was truly tireless. He gave up everything in his life to defend her and take care of her. And he went, balls to the wall, as they
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
Really did. And it was impressive to see. And he was lamenting the fact that he had no resources, that the prosecution had three different agencies, Department of Justice, Burbank Police, LAPD, working for them. And he had no one for
No.
him. He had himself and his younger lawyer, who's kind of his assistant. That's it. And
Yeah.
when it came to finding a key witness, and there was a very key witness, Donna Prow,
Yeah.
that the prosecution deliberately let out of jail and deliberately let go, and I bet told her to run.
Yeah.
He could have found her if he'd had an investigator, and they could have helped him find her because they did help him with other witnesses, but not with her, which is a really pointed, ugly thing. So I wound up there were moments writing this book as I was reading through the transcripts that I literally had to stand and walk away, go outside, breathe, because I just got so mad. This is not what a prosecutor does. This is not our job, and
You
I
can
still get worked up.
feel that energy in the prose. You can feel the outrage. It's really
Yeah.
compelling. And toward the end of the book, I forgive me, I think it's near the last chapter. You quote a Supreme Court decision that this has really stuck with me. I'll read it. Society wins not only when the guilty are convicted, but when criminal trials are fairly excuse me, when criminal trials are fair. Our system of the administration of justice suffers when any accused is treated unfairly. And I thought that was an incredible, I mean, she was no angel for sure.
No, no, no. There was actually what I discovered, and some of my readers actually already knew. There was a film made about this called "I Want to Live," starring Susan Hayward. She won an Oscar for Best Actress, but the film is largely, you know, it's not
Idealized.
accurate. They
Yeah,
whitewash her to a
right.
point that's ridiculous. And I
Yeah.
made a point in the book of not doing that. I'm going to tell
Right.
you who she really is. She's not a murderer, but she's on the fringes of society. This is a woman who was neglected and abandoned at birth. Her mother threw her into the homes of strangers. I mean, from almost the time she gave birth to her. It was a very tough life.
It was a very tough life, but yet you do such a good job of rendering her as a complex character because she had an eighth grade education, maybe. And yet she wrote beautiful letters and she listened to jazz and she loved classical music. I mean, she was a contradiction in many, she was a paradox in many ways. So
Yeah, I mean, that fascinated me. In spite of everything, talk about an impoverished life and the abuse she suffered throughout her childhood. She nevertheless had soul, and and very smart. She was extremely intelligent.
she
And
seemed,
so, yeah, she loved classical music. She read Omar Khayyam. She really loved jazz. I mean, it was kind of an amazing thing. And you can see, thank goodness, the producer of the film, Walter Wanger, kept an archive of all of the paperwork that came through his hands and got a hold of her letters and got a hold of actually the key report that the prosecution hid regarding their star witness, the accomplice, as well as a report by an investigator who volunteered his time after her conviction. These were key pieces of evidence, but the letters really give you a sense of who she is. And there
Mhm.
she sits on death row, sympathizing with her lawyer about how are you feeling? How are you doing? You must have about your kids and your wife. I hope everyone's all right. You don't see those kinds of things
Yeah.
usually when someone's in that situation. And when today it's a different story, by the way, on death row, especially in California, you're not going to die. Not that way anyway.
That
Back
way.
then,
No,
not
that's
so.
true.
And she was only on death row for less than 2 years before she was executed.
So incredible. I really, reading this, I really thought about how vital it is to tell stories about the past failures of the justice system so we can hope that Dr. King's, quote of the arc of the moral universe bending towards justice is actually correct. If we don't understand what's happened in the past, we don't understand where we're coming from right now. And I just felt that it was so interesting. Just two more questions, Marcia, if you don't mind. Um, what was the biggest challenge in writing true crime? Now, you've lived true crime and you have written so much as a novelist. Um, but what was the particular challenge of the true crime genre for you when you tried to tackle it?
Yeah, when I first released my first novel, Publishers Weekly put out a banner saying Clark turns to fiction to control the outcome. And I thought, right on,
There you go.
correct. Oh, not enough evidence. Backspace, 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 fingerprints. Blah, 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 blah. So, I mean, it was a wonderful thing. I could set it all up the way I wanted it. It was really
Yeah,
fun. Can't do that with truth. But here's the good news about truth. As Mark Twain said, fiction has to stick to possibilities. Truth doesn't. You know, if I tell you the story of what happened to Barbara in the course of this trial, and I was to script it for a film, you'd say, no way.
no
Are you
way.
kidding me? Yeah.
Yeah, right,
And are you kidding me? No
right.
one would do this. No one would do that. Oh, yeah, they did.
Too
Yeah, they
outrageous.
did.
Yeah. Are you going to, well, let me just frame it this way. What are you up to next? Are you returning to your novels? Are you working on a screenplay? Can you give us a hint about what we can expect next from you?
I do think I want to do another true crime book. I think that I'd like to do something that's more current because
Okay.
researching for something that's 70 years old, this is no easy thing.
Not recommended.
Not recommended. So if I could find something a little more current, that would be fun. But I would like to do another one because I do appellate cases. That is what kind of my day job. So I do what they are court appointed appeals. When you're convicted of a felony, you're entitled to a direct appeal, which is basically having a lawyer look over the case and the transcripts and see if there was error. So we're error catchers, basically. And then so I do true crime all the time. But I thought, but when it was very different looking at someone else's case where I'm not the advocate, where I'm just, standing on the outside and being able to see kind of dispassionately how things went. And I liked it. So I think I might do that again. But I also am really missing Samantha Brinkley. That was the
Oh,
last series that I wrote. So
you're
you never know.
well, whatever it is, come back because we'd love to talk to you about your next books.
I would love to. Thank you so much.
It has been such a pleasure, everybody. Trial by Ambush, Marcia Clark. You got to get it. Thanks, Marcia.
Thank you. Take
Have a
care.
great holiday.
You as well.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye. Okay, wasn't that fun, you guys? Marcia Clark. Next, Speaking of icons, we have another type of icon for our guest, Francesca Lia. You might know her from some of her novels. She's the author of more than 25 books of fiction, nonfiction, short stories, and poetry, and she's written screenplays adapting her own work. Dangerous Angels, her novel series, the Weetzie Bat series, some might know it as, was listed among NPR's 100 best ever teen novels. Although, trust me, you don't have to be a teen to appreciate their beauty and lyricism. Beautiful, beautiful books. She's received the Spectrum Award, the Phoenix Award, the ALA Rainbow Award, and the 2005 Margaret A. Edwards Lifetime Achievement Award, as well as other accolades from the American Library Association and the New York Times Review of Books, School Library Journal, and Publishers Weekly, among many others. She's also an acclaimed writing teacher and co-publisher of Lit Angels, a literary magazine on Substack. She's also, full disclosure, a dear friend of mine who I just adore. So, hey, Francesca, so good to see your beautiful face.
Great to see you, Sam. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for coming on. We're here to talk about the paperback release of your most recent novel, House of Hearts. And this is a moody, fascinating, compelling, mysterious type of novel that I absolutely loved when I first read it. And just to give people a little bit of a setup, when our lead character, Izzy, loses her lover when he disappears, it sets her on this dangerous and strange journey. It takes place around the Salton Sea. And that story begins with the line, "Bad things can happen in the desert, and boy, can it ever." I wanted to talk to you about the origin of this story. I understand, I don't know if we've ever talked about it, but I've certainly read that a vision for the book essentially came to you involving another character from one of your novels. Can you talk about that? What launched this?
Thank you. Yes. So I was obsessed with this particular myth that was sort of for many years, and I didn't quite know why. So that was haunting me. And then one day I had this image in my head of this character from another novel, Beyond the Pale Motel, that I wrote a few years before. She dies, spoiler, she dies in that book. And I saw this vision of another woman kind of rising up out of the desert in the darkness and going to avenge the death of Kat from Beyond the Pale Motel. And from there, I put together those two things, the myth and this image of this woman was this very strong, fierce character. And that's kind of where it came from. And then it developed in a lot of different ways after that.
Well, I want to talk about the landscape of Southern California in your work, but let's talk a little bit more about those Egyptian myths that kind of undergird this. Don't kind of. I mean, they're more than a parable in this story. What is your interest in that, and how does it feed your writing?
So often a fairy tale, a folk tale, or a myth will just come into my consciousness, sometimes for my whole life. The myth of Orpheus has been there since I can remember, and I'm just really haunted by them, and I have to explore them in this way in order to begin to understand them and what they mean for me in this sort of archetypal way. So that is often where my work originates, from some kind of archetypal story.
I don't even know if I know this, but were you raised with those types of stories, or were those your bedtime stories?
Yes, my dad used to tell me the Odyssey as a bedtime story, and we would, so I always joke that I'm a little off from that. It's a little weird, but and we would go look at a lot of paintings together that had classical myths as subject matter, and fairy tales always too.
Well, that's so interesting. It must be said your dad was a successful screenwriter, Irving
Yes.
Block, right?
Yes, he co-wrote the story for Forbidden Planet, which is going to be made apparently into a film or series, actually, come very soon. I just saw it announced.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
All those classic old films like being reinvented. So you were raised with storytelling.
Absolutely, yeah. And that, by the way, Forbidden Planet is from The Tempest, the Shakespearean play. So I kind of came by that honestly, right? or dishonestly, I don't know.
Honestly. Another thing I have to ask you about for your work. I mean, this book here, let me grab it for people. It's right here on my desk. This is the hardcover. It's the paperback now, but I have the hardcover. It renders the Salton Sea and that landscape, that desert landscape in that area so evocatively. And so, I mean, what are you going to do but see murder and cult people in a landscape like that? I mean, come on. Um, can you talk about, but your other works,
Yeah.
so much of your other work has engaged the landscape of Los Angeles. I mean, I can't think of you without thinking about Southern California. Can you talk about how that landscape feeds and informs your work?
Well, I was born and raised in LA, and I feel that I call it my muse. You know, it's really a character in almost all of my books, as you say, and that there's something about this sort of toxic beauty of Los Angeles that I find really compelling and inspiring. And so she shows up really in everything. And this was a different view. This is, of course, the desert with all that that implies, and the very harsh, stark beauty that it embodies too. And of course, the Salton Sea having been this resort town for celebrities that became, you know, as I say in the book, the anoxic cesspool, you know, that's a Salton Sea, but that still has a lot of its own very strange beauty to it.
And also a symbol of environmental destruction, I must say.
Exactly, which is a big topic.
Big theme in this work. I feel it feels difficult to talk about this work because it's so multi-layered, and I don't want to give anything away because there's so many twists and surprises in the narrative. Did it surprise you as you were writing it?
They always do in some way, because each book kind of teaches me something I need to know. So I thought this was about a woman searching for her lost lover in the desert, in this desolate landscape. It turned out to be she was searching for herself, her identity, and the secrets of her past. And that was the same for me. Not, you know, of course, very different, but in the sense of seeking the self rather than seeking the beloved, or thinking you're seeking the beloved and really needing to find the self, which is a theme in a lot of my books.
I have to tell you, we were speaking a little bit before we went live here. When we were in the virtual green room, as it were, there was a line again toward the end of the book, like there was a line at the end of Marcia's book, and there was a line at the end of this book that just kept replaying in my head like an earworm. It is, when you create, you sacrifice a little of yourself. I think the full line is, you sacrifice a little of yourself, the seed, the blue egg. I forget. It was beautiful, which it just gave me a lot of pause. That idea of creation taking something from the creator. And you are so prolific, my dear, throughout your career. What do you do to regenerate, I guess, and how
Thank you.
important is that?
Thank you. And before I answer that, I just want to say how intuitive you are, as always, because that is really the topic of or this book was a real sacrifice, in that I literally shattered my ankle, shattered my finances, shattered my relationship that I was in at the time. So but it was worth it in the end, because I'm proud of the book, and it also has brought me so much beauty and love and light. It's kind of amazing. So that question is really relevant to that. But what I have done in between that time of shattering and now has been to, you know, community is huge, family, community, movement, kind of processing it, moving it through, and art, you know, whether it's books, film, visual art, but probably mostly people. You know, I like to say life's hard, but you don't have to do it alone. And that's really the key to everything, which I know you represent that, because you're such a center of community and bringing people together. But that was a huge healing for me.
Thank you. Well, speaking of healing, you also teach writing workshops on on the healing nature of writing itself. And I wanted to know if you could give us a little bit about that and where we can find it and what that's about.
Oh, thank you. So I have a book, The Thorn Necklace, Healing Through Writing and the Creative Process, which is about that. It's memoir / craft book, and it's really about the power of the creative process to heal. And I do workshops on this repeatedly for all different levels and genres. And I use this in general in any kind of writing, teaching that I do, which is because I believe that our creative projects are so much from that deep place that often need some kind of catharsis by expressing it, and then by forming it through craft into something that we can give to others, which will also hopefully give them some kind of healing or resolution for themselves.
I love that so much. Final question. I have to ask you, so your Dangerous Angels series is so iconic. Really, you guys, if you don't know this series, if you don't know We'd See Bat, you have to. It's just a necessity if you live in Los Angeles to know about this series. And it is so visual and it is stuck with so many of us for so long. The natural question is, when is it going to be a movie? When is it going to be a TV series? What's the trajectory of that? Because I know it's been talked about for years.
Yes, it's been optioned for years. There've been many incarnations. I finally have it back now with my own script, and an amazing director, Rebecca Thomas, is attached. And I feel like it's taken so long for a reason. There are a lot of sort of people who've passed on who are part of this project, either inspiring it or helping it get to the next level. And so I'm in their honor. I'm really, it's something that I really am going to hopefully have happened before too long. Let's just say that.
Too long. Well, whenever it comes, we will receive it with bated breath, because
Yeah. Just don't hold your breath too.
I don't hold my breath. Yeah, exactly. Don't hold your breath too.
Yeah.
That could be dangerous. Speaking of dangerous.
Yeah.
Anyway, listen, thank you, my friend.
Thank you so much.
Should we tell them about David Bowie before we leave? We have a little
Yes,
bit.
please. But you said you're going to be more.
Okay, so this is a kind of a crazy thing. As I mentioned, Francesca and I have known each other for years. And when David Bowie died in January of 2016, I had the sense that the world was falling off its axis because this amazingly creative phenomenon had died. And I thought I was the only one feeling that crazy thought. And then somehow you and I were on the phone, and I don't even remember how it got brought up, but you said, it feels like since David Bowie died, the world has changed. So there you go.
So hopefully he can send some good
some Starman vibes
powerful.
down.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you for being my crazy friend. I love you.
Thank you. I love you too.
Come back on the show. Anyway, that's it for today, folks. Yes, you're very welcome. That's it for today. Marcia and Francesca, thank you so much for joining us. Also, thanks to the magical production manager, Julie Corlett, who makes things happen. I'm just a token. I'm just window dressing here. We hope you've enjoyed the conversation tonight. Bookish is going to be back again next month with another lineup of great authors, including Amy Wilson and the amazing Abigail Thomas. If you don't know Abigail Thomas's work, run right out and look it up. Also, let us know what you think about the time change, if we're going to do it or not. We've been doing this since the pandemic at 5 p.m. on a Friday, and we want to know if it's worth continuing at this time. Anyway, meanwhile, catch up on our past episodes and check out our other virtual programs too. You know where, scng.com/virtual events. And again, talking about subscribing, please do. We can't do this without you. scng.com/subscribe or bayareanewsgroup.com/reader services. If you've got any thoughts from today that you'd like to share, or if you have additional questions, please email us at events@scng.com. And hey, if you want to give me specific suggestions on the show directly, reach me at sdunn@scng.com. And remember, you can always find great coverage on books in our newspapers every day and on our sites And you can also sign up for the Book Pages newsletter that Eric Peterson, who's the Books Pages editor, puts together. It comes out once a week. Check that out. It's free. It's all free, you guys. It's free. Thank you. Anyway, have a great night. Have an amazing holiday. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you in January. Bye.